Hey Reddit, I'm posting here because I feel like I stepped into a parallel reality and I need to know I'm not losing my mind. My wife and I have been married for 8 years. The last year was rough, but not catastrophic. We argue more, sure. We went to counseling. We had those long, exhausting, let's be honest talks where you think things are finally improving. She kept telling me, we're not perfect, but we're working on it. I believed her. There were signs I ignored. She suddenly became obsessed with financial independence, asked a lot of questions about our accounts, started scanning documents, and said it was just for organization. She also became strangely calm during arguments, not peaceful, but detached, like the outcome didn't matter anymore. When I asked if she was thinking about divorce, she looked offended. "Why would you even say that?" she said. "I'm still here, aren't I?" That should have been my first clue. Because what I didn't know then was that while I was trying to save our marriage, she was already planning how to leave it, and I wasn't supposed to find out until it was too late. A week after that conversation, she asked me a question that seemed harmless at the time. "Do you remember where we keep the original copy of the marriage certificate?" She said it casually, scrolling on her phone like it wasn't a big deal. I asked why. "Counseling paperwork," she replied instantly. "They want everything on file. You know how these places are." It made sense. Too much sense. I nodded and told her where it was. That night, though, something nagged at me. Not panic, just that quiet internal voice saying, "Pay attention." I started noticing other small things. She stopped talking about the future. No more next summer or when we finally move. Everything became short-term. This month for now, we'll see. She also stopped fighting. Arguments ended quickly, not because we resolved them, but because she disengaged. The biggest shift was money. She suggested we temporarily separate our finances to reduce stress. Said it would help us focus on rebuilding trust without fighting over spending. When I hesitated, she smiled and said, "See, this is the control issue I was talking about in therapy." That shut me up. I agreed, on paper only. The joint account stayed open, but she opened a new one just in case. She reassured me over and over that it was not a step toward divorce. "I'd tell you if it was," she said. I'm not that kind of person. I wanted to believe her. But over the next few days, I realized something unsettling. She was preparing for a version of the future that didn't include me, and she was doing it calmly, methodically, like someone following a checklist. I didn't know it yet, but I was already behind the curve. I found it by accident. That's the part that still messes with me. She asked me to grab a charger from her home office while she was out running errands. Her laptop was open on the desk, screen asleep. I wasn't snooping. I swear that. But when I tapped the trackpad to wake it, a folder popped up front and center. The folder name stopped me cold. Post-separation. Not counseling. Not budget. Not personal. Post-separation. My stomach dropped. I stood there staring at it for a good 10 seconds, telling myself to close the laptop and walk away. But at that point, my gut had been right too many times. I clicked. Inside were scanned documents. Our marriage certificate, copies of my ID, bank statements, screenshots of our joint account, a spreadsheet titled Assets and Exit. Exit. I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was more. Emails drafted but not sent, messages to a lawyer, notes about temporary housing, even a checklist with dates. One line read, "Tell him after funds are secure." I sat down in the chair because my legs gave out. This wasn't fear or confusion. This was planning. Cold, deliberate planning. And the worst part? Some of the notes referenced arguments we'd had in therapy, things I'd said in vulnerability, reframed as examples of instability. She wasn't just preparing to leave. She was preparing to win. When she came home an hour later, smiling, bags in hand, I asked her how errands went. "Fine," she said. "Why?" I looked at her and realized something terrifying. She was living two timelines. And in hers, I was already a problem to manage. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to know just how deep this went, and more importantly, how easily she could lie to my face. That night, over dinner, I asked casually, "Hey, are you still talking to that lawyer your friend recommended?" She didn't hesitate for even half a second. "No," she said, taking a sip of wine. I looked into it and decided against it. Too dramatic. I want to fix things, not blow them up. Fix things. I nodded like I believed her, even though I'd seen the drafted emails. The subject lines. The notes about strategy. The reminders she'd set for herself. Then I asked another question, one I already knew the answer to. Why did you need copies of my ID? She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh my God, she said. The counselor suggested we organize important documents together. You know I'm bad at paperwork. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand like she was comforting me. I felt sick. Every answer she gave was smooth, polished, confident. There was no crack in the story, no nervous tell. She wasn't improvising. She was following a script she'd clearly rehearsed. That was the moment it fully hit me. If I hadn't found that folder, I would have walked straight into whatever she was planning. After dinner, she went to bed early, saying she was emotionally exhausted. I stayed up, staring at the wall, replaying everything. The therapy sessions, the vulnerable conversations, the reassurances. They weren't steps toward healing. They were intel. And suddenly, the counseling made sense. The calmness, the financial questions, the way she kept saying, let's not rush anything. She didn't want to rush. She wanted to finish preparing. I went back to the folder the next morning while she was in the shower. I wasn't proud of it, but at that point, pride felt irrelevant. I needed the whole truth. That's when I noticed a name I hadn't clocked before. Under a section labeled Support/Witnesses, there were 3 names. One was her sister. One was a coworker I barely knew. The third made my stomach drop. A guy she'd introduced to me months ago as just a friend from work. The same guy she defended every time I said something fell off. The same guy she accused me of being jealous and controlling over. There were notes next to his name. Bullet points. Dates. Short summaries of conversations. One line read, can confirm emotional neglect narrative. Narrative. I felt this cold clarity wash over me. This wasn't just a divorce plan. It was a story, one she was building carefully, with characters, witnesses, and a villain. And I knew exactly who the villain was supposed to be. When she came out of the bathroom, towel around her hair, she smiled and asked, what's wrong? You look pale. I asked her, very calmly, are you talking to him about our marriage? She tilted her head, confused. Who? I said his name. She sighed, annoyed. Wow, you're still stuck on that? He's been checking in because he knows we're struggling. That's what friends do. Friends. I nodded. And does he know you're planning to leave? Her smile flickered, just for a split second. Then she recovered. I don't know what you think you saw, she said, but you're connecting dots that aren't there. This is exactly why I'm worried about how you'll handle things if we separate. There was again, the setup, the soft threat disguised as concern. In that moment, I realized something crucial. She wasn't afraid of me finding out. She was counting on me being too confused to stop her. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That's probably what she expected, some emotional outburst she could later label as unstable or aggressive. Instead, I did something she hadn't planned for. I went quiet. The next day, I took a long lunch break and sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, just breathing. Then I called a lawyer. Not the lawyer she'd been drafting emails to, a different one, recommended by a friend who didn't know any of this was happening. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid out the facts, the shared accounts, the folder, the notes, the plan to secure funds before telling me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You're right to call now, the lawyer said. Not after. That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. By the end of the call, I'd done 3 things. I froze any large transfers from our joint account. I documented everything I'd found with timestamps. I was told, very clearly, not to let her know I knew the full extent of her plan. That night at home, she was unusually sweet. Asked about my day. Suggested a movie. Put her phone down face up on the table like a gesture of trust. I played along. At one point, she said, I feel like we're finally on the same page again. I almost laughed, because what she didn't know was that while she was polishing her exit strategy, I had just removed her biggest advantage. And the moment she realized that, that's when things were going to get ugly. It didn't take long. 2 days after I made those changes, she stormed into the house mid-afternoon, phone in hand, eyes sharp in a way I hadn't seen before. Did you touch the accounts? She demanded. I looked up from the couch, confused on purpose. What do you mean? She tried to soften it immediately, like she'd caught herself. One of my transfers didn't go through. Probably a bank error. I shrugged. No idea. I haven't done anything. That was a lie, but it was a calm one, and it threw her off. She paced the living room, typing furiously on her phone, then stopped and stared at me. We need to talk about our future, she said. Like, seriously. I nodded. Okay. That seemed to irritate her more than resistance would have. She sat down across from me and launched into a speech about how she felt unsafe lately, how my energy had changed, how she was worried about how I'd react when things inevitably shift. Shift, not if. I asked her, "Are you saying you want a divorce?" Her eyes widened, offended. Why do you keep jumping to extremes? I'm just saying we should be prepared. Prepared. That's when I knew she'd hit a wall she hadn't planned for. Her timeline was slipping. The money wasn't moving. I wasn't melting down. I wasn't giving her anything she could use. That night, I heard her crying quietly in the bathroom. Not sobbing, not grieving, just frustrated, like someone whose plan wasn't working the way it was supposed to. And in that moment, I felt something strange. Not guilt, not anger, relief. Because for the first time, the power wasn't quietly stacked against me. The next morning, she switched tactics. Instead of tension, she went soft. Too soft. She made breakfast, touched my arm when she walked past, asked if I wanted to take the weekend away somewhere, just us. It was the version of her I hadn't seen in months, the affectionate, understanding partner who wanted to reconnect. Omi would have fallen for it. This time, I watched it like a performance. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from her sister. "Hey, just checking in. Your wife's really worried about you. She says things have been intense lately." There it was. I checked the folder again while she was in the shower. A new note had been added under support/witnesses. Next to her sister's name. Spoke today. Concern established. My chest tightened. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was building a record. A paper trail of concern. Soft language that could later be twisted into fear, instability, unpredictability. That night, she sat next to me on the couch and said quietly, "I think maybe we should loop family in, just so everyone feels safe." Safe. I looked at her and realized the truth. She wasn't preparing for a divorce anymore. She was preparing for damage control, making sure that when everything came out, she'd already decided who people would believe. And suddenly, I understood the real danger wasn't losing my marriage. It was losing my voice. That night, I stopped trying to outmaneuver her quietly. I realized something important. If I stayed silent, she'd fill that silence for me. With concern, with implication, with a version of me I didn't recognize. So I went on record. The email I sent wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. I sent it to my lawyer, CC'd myself, and saved a copy offline. Dates. Exact phrases she'd used. Screenshots of the folder. Notes about her contacting my family out of concern. The attempted transfer from a joint account. No accusations. Just documentation. Then I sent one more message, this time to her. "I know about the post-separation folder. I've secured legal counsel. Please communicate with me in writing only." That was it. No threats. No anger. She read it within minutes. And then my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. The messages that followed came fast and frantic. "What are you talking about? Why are you doing this? You're making things worse than they need to be. We said we wouldn't involve lawyers yet." Yet, that word told me everything. When she got home later that night, she didn't yell. She didn't cry. She stood very still in the doorway and said, "You blindsided me." I almost laughed. "No," I said calmly. I caught up, and for the first time since this started, she looked scared, not of losing me, but of losing control of the narrative. The next morning, she tried to flip the board. She sent a long email to my lawyer, before I could, framing herself as concerned and me as escalating unnecessarily. She attached cherry-picked therapy notes and referenced my recent emotional volatility. It was polished, strategic, almost impressive, except for one problem. She attached the wrong file. Buried at the bottom was a draft titled Separation Timeline V3. It included dates, asset transfers, and the same line I'd seen before. "Tell him after funds are secure." My lawyer called me within the hour. She just handed us intent, he said. This changes everything. By afternoon, her tone shifted again. Apologies. Panic. Voice notes she quickly deleted. She showed up at the house unannounced, eyes red, asking to talk like adults. I didn't open the door, because her last move had done the opposite of what she wanted. It didn't make me look unstable. It made her plan visible. Once that file was out in the open, things moved fast. My lawyer sent a formal response outlining the timeline she'd accidentally confirmed: preparation, intent, and attempted transfers. Her lawyer's tone changed immediately. The concern language vanished. The messages got short. Careful. Then the phone calls started, from people who had only heard her version. Her sister called first. Awkward. Apologetic. I didn't know about the folder, she said. She told me you were spiraling. A coworker messaged next, saying he felt used and wanted nothing to do with being a witness anymore. Turns out he hadn't known he was being listed as one. The biggest shock came when my parents called, furious, not at me, but at the way she tried to pre-frame me as unstable. They'd been forwarded concerned messages with timestamps that suddenly didn't add up. The narrative cracked because facts are stubborn like that. She tried to pull it back together, sending a group text about misunderstandings and stress. It didn't land. People asked questions. She didn't have clean answers anymore. And in the middle of all that noise, I felt something unexpected: calm. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't guessing her next move. The truth was doing the work for me. She texted me late that night. You didn't have to humiliate me. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I didn't. Your plan did. By the time things settled, the decision felt almost anticlimactic. There was no dramatic showdown, no last fight, just paperwork, emails, and boundaries that grew firmer every day. My lawyer advised a clean separation, and for once, I didn't second-guess myself. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. She tried one last time to regain footing, suggested mediation for closure, floated the idea of staying friends, even hinted that maybe we'd both grown from this and could revisit things someday. I didn't engage, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood that every conversation was just another attempt to steer the outcome, and I was done letting her drive. We finalized the terms quietly, fairly. The joint account stayed intact. No sudden disappearances, no last-minute surprises. Her carefully planned exit turned into a straightforward process she didn't get to choreograph. The strangest part? She seemed smaller once the plan was gone. Less certain, less sharp. I realized then how much of her confidence had come from believing she was always one step ahead. Without that, she was just a person who'd been caught. When everything was officially done, I kept waiting for some emotional aftershock. Rage, regret, a sudden urge to call her and ask why. None of it came. What came instead was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unfamiliar at first. No tension humming in the background. No constant need to explain myself or anticipate how a conversation might be twisted later. I woke up without that tight feeling in my chest that had become so normal I thought it was just adulthood. I started noticing how much of my energy had been spent managing her moods, her plans, her version of reality. Without that weight, everyday things felt lighter. Workdays ended without dread. Even silence felt peaceful instead of ominous. People started telling me I looked different, calmer, more present. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just escaped a divorce. I'd escaped a slow, invisible erosion of myself. With distance came clarity. I replayed moments from our marriage with new eyes. The way she gathered information during fights, the way she framed vulnerability as weakness, the way she always needed an exit strategy. I realized this wasn't something that happened to her. It was how she moved through life. She didn't plan because she was scared. She planned because control made her feel safe. Understanding that didn't make what she did okay, but it did something important. It stopped me from taking it personally. I wasn't uniquely flawed. I was simply the next person in a pattern. That realization closed the door in my head more firmly than any legal document ever could. If you're reading this and something in your relationship feels off, don't ignore that quiet voice telling you to pay attention. Love shouldn't require you to constantly defend your reality or prove your stability. Here's what I learned the hard way. Pay attention to patterns, not reassurances. Anyone who plans an exit in secret is already gone. And if someone needs to control the story, it's usually because the truth doesn't favor them. Walking away didn't mean I lost my marriage. It meant I stopped letting someone else decide who I was. If you're standing at that edge right now, confused, doubting yourself, wondering if you're overreacting, you're probably not. Trust your instincts. Protect your future. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fixing what's broken. It's stepping out of the plan you were never meant to be part of.